The way we talk about the futures we tell each other, don't tend to be the futures that we end up living in. We need to start thinking about how we think about the future. I wanted to explore that gap between our desire to think about the future and our inability to do so with sufficient rigor and depth. I found this quite useful way of approaching these kinds of questions, which is could, should, might, don't. I'm Nick Foster. I'm a futures designer. And for the last, 25 years, I've been helping these companies think about the future. We all find talking about the future quite difficult, right? But it's not for lack of trying. And I think these represent the 4 primary words that we all reach for whenever we're talking about the future. So let's kick off with the first. This is what I call could futurism, perhaps the most prevalent of all forms of future thought and future work. And this is the way of thinking about the future as this kind of vast terrain of unwritten possibility. Anything could happen. And that's resulted in a popular futures landscape that looks a bit like this. Lots of monumental utopian architecture, monorails and drones, and these sort of extreme expressions of technocratic progress. You'll see a lot of incredible devices, which are all weirdly lit in neon purple and blue for some reason. So science fiction's been around for a long time. It's a dominant art form now, and it dominates all of our Hollywood top 10 lists. And this sort of staggering growth in popularity of science fiction cinema, paired with all developments in CGI and visual effects, has kind of set the tone for how a lot of people think about and talk about the future. A lot of people I've worked with, they treat science fiction as some sort of predictive medium. But you've got to remember, the objects and the technologies in science fiction cinema are just devices to keep the story moving along. And often when you see images like this, people think, wow, this is exciting, this is imaginative, this is creative. But actually what you realize if you spend time around this kind of work is it's remarkably repetitive. That's could futurism. It's incredibly popular and it's very useful in what it does, which is to build excitement, to get people to think about the future in excited, positive ways. But it dramatically distorts the future because it doesn't truly acknowledge the present. It ignores the lives that we actually live. It treats the future as sort of over there somewhere, occupied by other, much more heroic people than ourselves. Next is should futurism. So this is a way of thinking about the future as a place filled with some form of certainty. Now, there are a couple of ways to think about this. Should futurism is either trying to nudge us towards some sort of predefined endpoint or trying to identify the future before it arrives. Lots of people have lots of strong ideas about where we should be heading in the future. Organized religions and theology. Every major religion has some sort of clearly defined endpoint that we should all be pointing towards. But whether you're a religious person or not, we all have our own notions of sort of morality and ethics and societal expectations. And that's based on this notion of a better world. And whenever we say the word better, what we have to realize is that we're expressing an internal ideology. It's not just individuals that have ideologies. Organizations and companies do too. They often don't go into a lot of detail about what they mean by better or who it's better for. And I think that this represents one of the major challenges of should futurism. Our ideologies are so obvious to us and they're so deeply ingrained in us that whenever we say better, we just sort of make an assumption that everybody in the room holds the same values to be true. But there's a second form of should futurism that we all do, we all know, and it surrounds us all. And that's about trying to uncover what might be coming our way, agnostic of whether it be better or worse. Now, we've been trying to do this for a long time. We've been trying to unpick the future through anything. We've tried tarot, we've tried following pig entrails, whatever it is. But we don't tend to use these mythical tools in business anymore. And in its place, we've replaced it with something much more rational, data. So once we can measure something, we can record those measurements. And if you do that for long enough, you can create a model of how you think the world works. And once you have that model, you can start to project it forwards, and it becomes a tool for prophecy. We use it every day. We use it for things like the weather. We use it for risk assessments. We use it for insurance and all forms of investing. And our lives are now dominated by these models of understanding and these numeric observations of the way we think our world works. And when the future actually plays out, these pieces of numeric fiction are often way off track. I think what we're beginning to realize is that many of the things that we're now trying to measure, particularly the things that have people involved, they're significantly more chaotic than we think they are. Habit number 3 when we're thinking about the future is what I refer to as might. This involves looking at the future and trying to imagine all the things that might happen. So it's very well named. A way to think about this is thinking about something like chess. So in games like chess, we're constantly assessing and reassessing scenarios that might play out. If I do this, they might move there, and then I might move there. Trying to think about the future as a terrain of possibility. It's a decision tree, and as moves and counter moves play out, the space of opportunity, the space of complexity just rapidly expands. As time stretches out into the future, these decision trees just get broader and broader and broader. And as with everything in life, where there's an observable pattern, somebody will inevitably make a model. Scenarios about the future are only ever as good as the information that you have coming into your calculations. And in truth, you're never going to have all the information you seek. No matter how much you try, there's always going to be something you've missed, a weak signal that nobody noticed, something that nobody saw coming. Our imagination about the future is only as good as what we've experienced in the past, which is the reason that magic works. When a magician pulls a card out from behind your ear or makes a tiger appear in a previously empty box, we just have to attribute it to magic because we've never experienced it before. So that's might futurism, the third of the foursome. It's a way of thinking about the future in a plural way, as a terrain of uncertainty, and it can help us be considerate and to think more broadly, which I like. But we can never come close to imagining deeply enough or with enough conviction or belief about what actually is going to happen. There's always going to be more scenarios out there. Final one, don't futurism. We're all familiar of notions of the future as a scary or a frightening place. And these ideas can be really powerful because there's nothing quite as powerful as an emotion as fear. Religions have figured this out a long time ago. Every religion has a strong idea of places like hell or purgatory or Jahannam, for places that lie ahead of us if we do something wrong today. Some terrible thing that you really want to avoid. Don't go over there, it's bad, you won't like it. There's also a long history of exploring things like dystopias and collapses and end-of-the-world scenarios in things like our science fiction cinema, and it can be quite successful. Books, TV shows and movies, they offer quite a safe space to explore some of these potentially negative futures, places we wouldn't want to end up, the awful versions of the futures that lie ahead of us. Whenever we see an undesirable future ahead of us, it's natural that we want to steer people away from them. Sometimes this takes the shape of things like campaigns and protests and activism. But I think don't futurism is more than just this. When done well or when done deeply, don't futurism encourages a deeper, more sort of skeptical viewing of the future. Also, just as with should futurism, data is often widely used in don't futurism too. Data is a very powerful tool to illustrate to people places that we do not want to go, or we would be, sad to find ourselves. This way of thinking has been more adopted into business and places where it's sort of never really had a home before. Some companies and lots of individuals are now starting to become much more aware of the implications of their decisions and the negative externalities of the things that they're doing in the world. But again, just like the other three we've talked about, don't futurism does have its own flaws. The first is that it's very hard to get someone to stop doing something that's either very popular or very profitable. I think also when deployed poorly or deployed in isolation, don't futurism has a habit of dividing people into sort of simplistic, pugnacious factions of baddies and goodies. It can often be really polemic in its tone as well, and it can demand this sort of massive, immediate, uncompromising action, which is often impossible for the things that are actually trying to be changed. I think as well, by its very nature, a lot of don't futurism happens outside of the things that it wants to change. It often prefers to stand on the outside and offer critique or commentary rather than getting involved and proposing solutions or trying to change it itself. And therefore, it can often be quite complex. It can be quite abstract. It can be quite unapproachable and honestly, quite easy to ignore. I think perhaps one of the things that we're all starting to realize, though, that's probably a lot deeper than that. Spending too long in the don't camp can just make you feel hopeless. It can become crippling. Those are the four ways I think we think about the future. Could, should, might, don't. And I've found it really useful to keep those categories in mind. I think I've got one tip for you all. And that is that one of the most basic things you can do is to wrap your head around the simple fact that the future is just an evolution of the present, just as the present is an evolution of the past. The future is going to be filled with ordinary people, like all of us. Not heroes, not fantasy people, not somebody else, but us. If we're serious about nudging the future into different directions, I think we need to go one step deeper than proposing new solutions or new whats. We need to reassess how we think about the future so we can approach those conversations with more rigor, more depth, and more structure. I think that's going to take a lot of work. It'll probably outlast me, but it's work that I'm trying to do, and I hope I've inspired you at least to have a think about how you think about the future. So thank you all.